Okay, this is Patrick at Qdabra. Welcome to our weekly webinar. Today we're actually doing a preview of our FormsViewer training at the end of the month. And I'm going to be showing you some demos of what we plan to demo and the training content. We're going to talk about what we're going to do at the end of the month. We've got a class. Last time we did a class was in October, so it's been quite a while. Lots of things have changed since then. And before we get started, I just want to run a quick poll here to get an idea of where people are at. So we'll launch this. This is a one question, one answer type of thing. So just if you don't mind playing around a second here, let's take a look at this. And looks like we've got about half of you voting. So we'll wait another minute or 10 seconds, 5 seconds. Okay. And it looks like most of you are in FormsViewer, so that's great to see. Thank you for doing that. Quick poll. I just wanted to get the chance. No one actually had any of the other answers. Everyone was 100% for the first one, so thank you very much for that. It's great to have so many FormsViewer friends here today. I want to do a shout out to our newest hire, Curvy Alfafara, who has just joined us. She's actually been working on this form that I'm demoing today, expense reports, and it's a great example of how somebody who has never actually done this kind of thing can quickly do it. So the techniques we're going to cover in the class, there's a lot of content from before, but we're going to actually create new content around these items. So we're going to look at tuning up your forms. In fact, today's demo, we're going to highlight a few commands, actually close to 10, that will make your experience, your forms experience, much better than it is today. We'll show you how to map data to lists today. You don't need to do anything in the designer anymore. We've got everything taken care of in the browser. And then we'll also show, in part 2 of this training preview, I will go over list forms, connecting to third-party services, and building a dashboard and actually submitting to a database. So this what you see here in red, the check mark here is the benefit to you. So the reason why we want to tune up your forms is to basically, fill those gaps in your solution where Microsoft never did the functionality. Mapping repeating data, obviously 95% of all the real-world forms out there have repeating data, and you need to extract it for reporting purposes, so we need to do that. The list forms are great today, but they don't have the ability for custom CSS or JavaScript or even qRules commands. And so, oops, I went too fast. Preview. And then connecting to third-party services, obviously you want to get all of the smart new functionality out there on the web today. We're no longer developing applications for desktops. Everything's on the web, everything's a web service, everything's cloud-based. And there's tons of wonderful things out there that you can tie into with some of the web service glue that we've added to FormsViewer. The dashboard stuff, there's lots of ways to do dashboards. We've talked about this probably at least half a dozen times in the last few years, and we'll show you how to create a dashboard using FormsViewer to build a smart view. And I'm not going to cover that today, but we'll talk about it next week. And then finally, this submitting data to a database. Obviously, you need scalability. For forms that collect a lot of data, you need to, SharePoint has limits around the list size and so forth. So we need to map things to database. And the cool thing about that is it gives us the ability to connect with Excel and have this very dynamic live reporting process. Okay, so the class size for next week, the 27th, is limited. In fact, we like to keep the class small. There's one instructor. If there was too many people, you've got difficulty with managing questions and whatnot. So we are going to have 8 people in the class, maybe 9. If you're interested, we already have like 3 people registered. So now's the time to register. You simply go to Qdabra.com. That's the first step up here in the left corner. You click on Education, Classes, and then Register. Type in your name, hit Submit. Done. You could do it right now. Meanwhile, in 2020, we will see a lot of these wonderful looking roadsters on the highway. I think this is like Napa wine country. And you'll also, the time will be up for you to do your FormsViewer tune-up of your InfoPath forms, because Microsoft has given us the 2025 date as being the end-all for InfoPath support. And who knows, maybe in the next 2 years it will break. So, you know, better sooner than later, but at some point you're going to have to bring your forms into the future. So today, what I'm going to demo today are some of these really cool techniques. And we've got we got generate GUID, we got get input parameter, we got get user profile by name, insert and delete, render form. So we've got about 10 different things, actually a little more than 10, that commands that we like to add to forms. And the reason for adding some of these commands, I'm going to do a demo first, and then I'm going to come back to this and explain. So let's just get off. Let's just do the demo here. And so we've got a SharePoint site here. This is 365. And we've got an expense report library. We're using the expense report form. We've actually created a new one for our internal processes. And this form, as you can see, it's a FormsViewer form. It looks really good. It loads quickly. No problem there. I'm just going to fill it out real quick. You can see it's got that rendering, the dynamic rendering. So as I move, you know, the form expands and collapses. And this is important for mobile. So if you have a mobile form, you don't want to see white space on the left and the right. The mobile forms, the mobile devices like Surface, your phone, an iPad or an Android tablet, they have a very high DPI. And what does that mean? Well, dots per inch, it means that, you know, instead of this typical 72 dots per inch that you see with desktops in the past, you've got these Retina displays with 300 DPI. And what happens is they've got, you know, 2,000 or 1,000 dots on that small screen. You know, the Surface has, I think, 4,000. It's 4K, right? So what happens is it does this scaling, and if you don't do this kind of responsive design, the forms just look terrible on the new screens. So that's why we have that. And the way we're doing that is in the form on load. We covered this actually last week. In last week's webinar we showed you, but in the form we've got a command that loads a CSS, and hopefully you can see this. I'm just going to, I think you can see this, but let me launch Zoom It just in case. It would be better to zoom in. So we'll zoom in and we'll take a look at this. Hopefully I remember how to do this. So you can see the command here, load resource name, and it's loading that styles.css. Let's take a look at that styles.css. Last week we were talking about a CSS called Beautiful, but this week is styles. And we've customized a lot of these controls in our CSS to be 100%. That's basically fill the screen. We also have this 7 and 10 column table layouts, which is important if you've got a table with 7 columns, which we do. And we're doing trying to make it look good, and we've got different settings because we have different types of tables. Some tables with lots of columns, some tables with fewer columns, and we've got a button that we're coloring. We've got special coloring on the buttons. In fact, if we go back to the designer, you'll see that the buttons look very plain here, but if we switch to the actual view, you can see that it looks really great, right? In fact, we've got 2 kinds of buttons here. We've got a debug button at the bottom, which you can't see, and we've got these round buttons here. And this is a great practice, by the way, to put, I didn't actually put this in the slide deck, but to have your button down below go to a debug screen. And then you can see if there was success on load. You know, here's our qRules commands. So the load resource command actually did succeed, but it tried to get items from a list. That failed. I'll talk more about that in a second. It also tried to get the status of the form if in case it was opened to approve or to reject, and that failed because this is the first time we're opening the form. But you can see these buttons have these nice rounded, curved corners. Like I said, we talked about this last week, but we're doing all of this cool technique in the style CSS, and I'll include this with the obviously with the package today. It'll be in there, but it's very easy with FormsViewer to do this using that load resource command. So that's the first thing I want to kind of draw to your attention to. Now, the load resource command is actually something we talk about here on the day 2 content, and we're adding it to CSS to list forms. We'll probably do that next week as well. But because your list forms are now being rendered in FormsViewer, you can actually do this. You can add a CSS to your list form and make them look really futuristic and good looking on mobile devices. So it's not just about doing it for the main forms, you can also do it for the list forms. Now, let's go back to the form here. So the form on open, one thing we're doing is we're actually, let me just fill it out. So I have a customer lunch today, and Pure Elements, the name of the company. And they're a Canadian company. They make water filtration systems. And let's just say I went to get coffee with them, and we went to Starbucks. And I'm going to attach a receipt. And the amount is going to be $25, something like that. And I'm going to add another item for the actual lunch. We had sandwiches, or we're going to have sandwiches. I don't know, we'll go to Johnny John's or something like that. No receipt for that one. Don't need a receipt if it's less than $75, or maybe it's $100 now with the IRS, but we'll just type this in. Okay, so here's my expense report. It's summing up the totals on the right. It's got a nice button for insert and delete. So in the stock InfoPath forms, you get this insert widget that's hard to discover for first-time users. So we've added this insert and delete button. Let me just show you how we did that. These are just picture buttons. So there's a picture button here, and just like we saw with the load resource command, this is just calling a qRules command to, let's see if I can zoom in on this, to insert into that repeating table a child element. So it's a very simple command. One thing that we're going to be showing in the class, which I think is really useful for folks, is to look at the actual command builder. So in FormsViewer today, one of the new features we added just in the last 6 months was this ability to go in and build your commands on the fly. So in the design mode of FormsViewer, we've got a bunch of functionality now. One of the cool pieces of functionality is this design builder. So let's say I wanted to look into insert. I would go in here and it would help me build out that command. So it would help me select the nodes I want to insert into the expense details, right? And I think, if I'm not mistaken, the item here, and I should be able to look at this in the repeating table, the repeating parent is items, and then the actual child node is going to be that item, right, like that. And that's pretty much all there is to it. And then you just copy this to the clipboard, right? Now, in our case, we're actually doing a position thing. So we're actually saying we want to do it dynamically given a position. And that position is, I think it's like the count of the preceding sibling or something like that. And you can see here, as I'm typing, it's creating this down below. Preceding sibling. In the future, of course, we'll have a command builder or a function builder that will allow you to do this. But so something like that is what I want. So, and you can see it added that concat when we went into dynamic mode. So this command builder is very useful for lots of commands, and it's great reference. So if you're like wondering, how do I build my qRules commands? You know, Patrick showed it in the webinar, but it was very confusing to me. Then you can always go in there. And so you can see, let's just check and see how close we got to that command syntax. So it's got the count. So we actually use the count from the form. That's actually a better way of doing it. So instead of this dynamic value, we actually had the count. So we just select count, confirm, and that's actually what it is. So we can take that, copy it in to the designer, and it should be very similar to this one. You can see there it is, very similar. So that's how you build commands in the command builder. The delete command is also very simple. It's just a command that deletes a row, and you need a position count as well for this one. In this case, the position count goes in brackets inside of the actual XPath. So you can see that we've got delete just takes one parameter XPath all the way to the child, and then you put the count in brackets after the child, so it's going to delete that whole row, everything underneath it. So that's a pretty simple command. Those are two ways to make your form look good that you can't do in typical InfoPath forms, because you end up with these widgets that are hard to discover. They don't look as good. They're tiny. So we want to add buttons. That's a very typical technique that we add. So moving right along, when you're creating a form, and one of the cool things about this form is it's actually going to do a couple of different things. One is that when I submit this, I can submit it as is and just be done. Or I can say, well, I've got 2 expense reports I need to submit. Let's do both. So when I submit this, I'm actually doing quite a few things. And let's just take a look at that. The submit new is taking a little bit of time here, because what it's doing when I submit it is it's generating a PDF. And the reason why we want to generate a PDF is so we can send it as a link to, we want to send it as a link in our email. And it's refreshing the form. So without having to go back to the library and click new, it gives me a brand new slate, and I can fill out another form and hit submit again. We talked a little bit about this, I think it was 2 weeks ago. We showed the same technique. And this technique is actually really cool. It's just on the submit, we've got a rule. We've got a lot of rules here, but this rule is actually doing the, it's submitting it and it's resetting the form. And I believe the command is transform. So this command here, if you can see this, is a stock qRules command that transforms your entire form, just basically blanks it out. And then at the end, we have to, of course, if you have values or default values, then you have to reset them, of course. But that's what we're doing, is we're just basically doing all the stuff that we normally do with the submit, and then we have this extra step that you don't see here on the regular submit, and the extra step is to do that blanking. So this form, but it's not just doing the blanking. It's also submitting the values to a list, and let's take a look at that. We can look at the, there's lots of stuff going on here, obviously. One of the ways that we can centralize logic, so these rules both have a lot, these buttons both have a lot of rules, and a better practice is to actually put the rules that are the same underneath a similar node in form logic. And the reason for that is it gives you one location to change when you want to change your rules. So here we have a submit. Here's where the bulk of the submit operation takes place. This is the common rules for both of those buttons. So it's submitting to list using a qRules command, and let's take a look at those lists real quick. So the expense reports library is, as you can see, if I refresh this, it will show me the one I just submitted. And there it is right there. It's number 51. And I can go into the actual, I think this is one of the lists. This is the items list. And I can look at, I think I need to look at stuff that was recently modified. We be nice if it would just give us the last, but you can see down below here that 51 that I just submitted, there's 2 items associated with it. So it's submitting the repeating data to this list, and the way we do this in qRules is we have this command called SubmitToSharePointList, and most of you are familiar with this. This command is pretty simple. It's just submit to SharePoint list. Once again, we could use a command builder to do this, and it's submitting it to 2 different lists. There's a parent-child relationship. So there's a list for the parent, which is right here. And this is just showing us the parent list, the one I just submitted, hopefully, 51, and customer lunch with pure elements. And then the child list is relationally mapped to that for those 2 items. And the way we're doing that, and the way we're going to be doing this moving forward, is in the form designer, you've got this this ability to map to lists. And so you can see here that hopefully it'll show us our mapping. So we've got these 2 different mappings in the designer now. And you can use the browser to edit these. So one of them is this parent list here on the top, and then the child list is underneath it. You can see the child list is repeating, the parent list is not. And we're just using this browser UI to create these mappings. So it's very simple to edit them. You don't have to go into the designer. And the submit to SharePoint list command, of course, once again, in the command builder, you can go to submit SharePoint list, and you can build up your command to submit to the mapping. In our case, our mapping is mapping, so we can just omit it, and we have a DS name, I think, is add attachment. You can see how it's automatically populating the resources from our form, makes it easier to create these commands, and then that gives us a command that looks pretty similar to what we just saw in the designer. In fact, let's take another look at it. Probably missing something. Oh, the actual submit connection. So the submit connection is down below here. So this would be the SHP list. So this is almost exactly, we didn't actually need the first one. We could have omitted this. And then that would give us the exact same command that we have in the form. So once again, Command Builder is a really great way to build your commands. So let's take a look at the next piece here. So when I submitted the form, it also submitted the items. It generated a PDF. So where did that PDF go? Well, the PDF, you can see here, I just got an email. I got an email saying, hey, we got an expense report number 51 needs to be approved here. And what's interesting is I've got this PDF stored now in SharePoint, so I can actually just click on it and I can see it. So this is exactly the thing I just entered. We ought to probably create a separate view for the printing of this, but you can see the color of the drop downs and the drop down buttons are there. We should probably create a separate view for that. But you can see this is exactly what I entered in the when I just filled it out. So one thing that's nice is that if you have people on the go, you can actually create these. Let's see if I can find the library. We've got these expense reports, and here's the library. If I just refresh this, you'll see that I have a separate document library where I'm storing my PDF. In fact, it's doing it the same. It's doing it per day per person, which is probably, it should use 51 or something instead. But you can see there's the PDF it just generated. And that's nice because that allows me to send an email to somebody, and if they're on the go, they don't necessarily need to log in, open the form. They can just click on the PDF. And then they can just click on a one-click button here to approve it. Now, if you look at this one click, let's just take a look at this in Notepad. This is a really clever technique that we've demoed in the past. And I'm just going to, I don't have Notepad launched, so I'm going to launch Notepad++, and we'll just create a new view here. So this link is pretty large, but what I want to show is this last piece here, these last 2 pieces. So there's the status equals approved actually is the most important thing here. And what we're doing is we're actually passing a parameter to the form on load. So if I go back to my email, if I click on this approve button, it's going to automatically open the form and it's going to approve it in one fell swoop. And that's great because you're in your car driving. You don't need to worry about logging in because you got an anonymous link. You don't want to worry about having to type anything or hit some other button. You just want a one-click approval. And that's what that gives you, is that one-click approval. So we're doing the one-click approval with the get input parameter. And as you saw on load, if we go back to qRules, all of our on load commands are on finished loading. We've got the load CSS here. We saw that. We've also got this thing called get input parameters, and you can see that that's actually checking to see what the status is. And if the status is approved, it's automatically setting the approval and showing us that approval information. So that's how easy it is. You can actually get a parameter from the URL, and that this technique can be used for doing lots of things, but the most compelling is this one where you're doing a very quick approval. So far I've demoed the get input parameter, insert and delete, render form. Let's take a look at that. Render form is the PDF generation command. So when we click the submit, we've got this render form command here that's running. It's called render form. The format is PDF. We can actually render in different formats. We're giving it a view, which is the standard default view. We want to output it in a base 64 format, and we have this file name that we're sending to it. So this form actually gets generated, and then we upload it to that library so that we can use a link for the email. So once again, why is render form interesting? Why generate the PDF? Well, one reason is because it gives us a copy in time, a record of what happened. But also because it allows these external submitters to see something without actually having to log into the site or without having to, to go through and open up a form. Looks like we have a quick question here. So Dave has this question. Dave, I'm sorry, Dave, I didn't see this earlier. We had thought it was 2026. We ended, yeah. So it's up until 2026 is the support window. It's you're right, because Microsoft created, they shipped InfoPath Form Services in SharePoint 2016. Under the covers, you've got this functionality that's built into the workflow. They had to ship it again, and therefore the clock was reset on 2016 for the InfoPath Form Services. For the actual filler and the designer, those were also extended to the end of 2025 or January 2026 based on that. So yeah, so Dave's question is about the support window with Microsoft being 2026, not 2025. And yeah, I kind of misspoke there, but you get the idea. So I've showed the PDF, I've showed the insert delete, save to SharePoint. So when we generate that PDF, we're actually saving it to SharePoint. And you can see that this command has two actions in it. It's now let's see here. Where are we doing all this submit to share? We're actually probably in that form logic because it's the same for both. We have in here we're saving the files to SharePoint. So we're saving the PDF file to SharePoint using a command. And once again, we're using a qRules command called save to SharePoint. So you can see there's so much stuff in qRules that is useful. And this is actually going to take that PDF that we generated and it's going to save it up to the folder based on the form name. And you can see that happen. You can also do this with images and attachments, and those are getting uploaded as well. If we go back to our site, let's take a look at, I'll go up here to the one I did yesterday. You can see that I've got my image of my receipt there. Not much of a receipt, but so it's very easy. You're going to upload your receipts. You're going to upload your PDF to this library, and that, if it's a file attachment, it allows you to edit it without opening the form. It also allows you to search on it, and it allows people to see things without having to open the form, edit and view. And it's very useful for people who are on the go who don't necessarily want to log in and go through the rigmarole of opening the form and clicking on something. And it's a lot of steps to open the form. Double click on the receipt, take a look at the receipt, versus just opening one link in your email. Okay, so hopefully that's clear. The transform command, I showed you that. That's clearing the fields and speeding up the subsequent submits. And what I want to do next week is I want to talk about the other commands that we're using. So we've got a generate GUID command that is actually creating a unique ID that we're going to use to prevent people from anonymously approving it if they aren't me. So if I'm the manager, we wouldn't want somebody to just submit their expense report and then create a link that they could use to approve it themselves. So the way we're going to prevent that is we're going to use a GUID, a globally unique ID. And we have a command called generate GUID in the form that will generate that for us. We're actually already using that in some places already. And we're going to talk about dynamically loading the policy. So the policy, if we go back to our expense report, is a, it's an expense policy. We have a technique for dynamically loading these. So this is actually XML data that we pull in from another location. So we have, I'm trying to find the template here. We have a policies, where is it? That's the flow. We have a policies library. I can just open it from here. So we have this policies form that we're using to create the policies, and it's a very simple form. I guess this might be the new one they're doing, but this just allows you to create a policy and submit it. If we go back to the site and we should have policies down here. I can't find it now. I had it a moment ago. It's probably right in front of my face. But there it is. Okay, so we have these three policies. Basically, what we're doing is we've got a form that this is the form here that allows us to set a policy. And for the purpose of this demo, we've just got these three different languages. So we've got our English policy, we've got our Japanese or Filipino policy because my team's in Manila, and I also have a team in Japan, so we've got our Japanese policy. So what we'll show next week is we'll show the ability to dynamically load that policy in based on what the user selects from a drop-down. And this is a clever technique let's go back to the actual expense report. So what we'll have is we'll have a drop-down in here that allows you to select a policy and it'll pull it in automatically. The technique is dynamic, so we're changing the data connection dynamically based on something in the form. So it could be a configuration setting. This would be useful if, for example, you have a different policy for subcontractors or employees or managers. Maybe you want to give the managers a higher limit for their expense report. You could do the same thing. You could change the policy based on that. In this case, we're changing the policy based on the language. We actually have a customer who is using this when they're signing up their employees to with a form, and they get a different language, a different terms and conditions based on where they logged in from. So this is a good example of that dynamic, what we call switching between data connections based on some parameter in the form. So I'll show that next week. We'll talk more about the training next week. I talked about load resource. I will talk more about refresh SharePoint list items next week. So there's a two-way, you can create a two-way data connection so that if somebody goes in and changes the items in the list, you can actually pull in those changes into your form so that you can edit the data in the form or you can edit the data in the list. Sometimes you don't want to do that, but in this case, we're going to show you how to do that. And then And then I'll also show next week how to connect to web services. So this is actually really interesting. We are going to add the character recognition to the automatically get the text out of that expense report so we can search for it. We'll show you how to send a PDF to Docusign. We'll use a different sample for that. We'll use a statement of work contract. So you want to send something to a customer or to a partner to sign. We did this demo back in November, so there is a webinar already recorded on our YouTube channel. You can take a look at that. We'll do it again in the training. We're going to give you a lab you can walk through and fill it out. Basically, add the Docusign integration to your form. You do need a Docusign account, and that's true for Google as well. And then lastly, we'll show you how to do this external authentication using SMS texting. So this is actually a great technique that we demoed about a month ago to authenticate people who are not connected to your SharePoint site. So you can actually send them a text saying, here's a code, and the code can expire in 60 seconds or 90 seconds. And that will prevent people from logging in who don't have the right cell phone, right? Because if, obviously you keep the cell phones in a list, or maybe if they're a new customer, you add it. But it's a great way for authenticating people and tying them to a device. And all of these techniques use the JSON to XML and XML to JSON qRules. In the Form Designer, if we look at the top here, we have a JSON XML builder. We'll talk about that in the training and show you how to use this to create your connections to those third-party web services. And then I'll also do a demo next week on building dashboards. It may stretch. We may have to do a part 3, but hopefully we'll get most of this done next week. The dashboards are really important for creating, some customers of ours they'll have a SharePoint site with a view, they'll have a SharePoint library for their form, and they'll have 100 views, one for every single possible scenario. And those views are hard to maintain. So I like to create a dashboard that's like one view for everyone. It's one ring to rule them all. And you do your sorting and filtering, and you detect who it is, and they log in. You automatically filter the contents to show them what's assigned to them. It's very easy to create something that's colorful, that's fast, that just shows them the information they need without going through and using the traditional SharePoint view methodology. So we'll show you that, and we're using FormsViewer and InfoPath once again to create those views. qRules has a lot of cool commands like sort table that allow you to make that dashboard powerful. And then finally, we'll look at submitting to a database using the submit to DBXL qRules command. This allows you to submit to an Azure database running in the cloud or just something on-prem. We have a lot of customers that do this for scalability mainly, but also for reusability, for data reusability, because they want to get the data out of their forms for some other line of business process, Salesforce, whatever. So they're doing that. And then that allows us to attach an Excel 2016 to the SQL database and do these SQL joins to build these cool pivot charts. So we'll do that next week, hopefully. We're certainly going to do it in the training. Once again, this is a preview for the training day content. In general, the training day starts off with some presentations and some demos, just like today, and then any questions that you have. And then we do a lab. So we'll have a Word document that has you walk through and do the same demo that I did. And I'm there to help you while while you're doing the lab. We'll do a brainstorm session to talk about how these techniques can be used in the future for your forms. We'll do a trivia quiz on some minor details I presented, and then we'll summarize with key takeaways, and I'll send out the video recording after the class. So that was it for today's quick preview. Any questions? I think I went over. Well, I want to thank you all for being here. I hope you do register for the class. It sounds like everyone has FormsViewer. So definitely you'll want to register for that class. We are going to tape it. We're going to do it again in May. So if the time doesn't work for you, we have it the same class, probably a little bit extra content happening in May. But I want to encourage you to register for that class. It looks like we have a question from Dave. Oh, you're just saying thank you. Yeah, thanks Dave for being here. We'll do a part 2 of the overview next week and hopefully get through everything. We may even have a part 3 the following week, but then of course we're doing the training, I think. So mainly next week. Anyway, I hope to have you in the training. Look forward to having you go through and do this with your forms. Lots of cool techniques here. Once again, FormsViewer is the only migration path for InfoPath. It's super lowest cost solution out there because it's the only migration path. Zero to minimal effort. For people with a huge forms investment today, it is the option. It is the option you should look at. Not only does it take your forms as is and migrate them, which reduces your costs. There's no rebuilding, obviously. Time it takes to rebuild it. There's none of that. But it extends your forms, makes them faster, better. Publishing process is a breeze. We saw several techniques today that are extending the forms. Mobile, that responsive design, the look and feel of the form is customizable now. So there are lots of reasons to use FormsViewer, but perhaps the biggest reason is because we're behind it. We're going to be supporting you for many, many years to come, hopefully much longer than Microsoft. And we're going to be adding more and more features, and it's going to continue to be a super low cost, zero to minimal cost solution for you moving forward. And here's the training data sheet from last October. These days will change. These are different because we just did the overview. I need to update this slide. But I want to thank you all for being here today, and I hope to have you here next week. Have a great day.